Your hairline did not sign up for this. You finally decide to stop wasting time in the gym. You clean up your diet, you start following a serious training program, and you buy the one supplement that almost every strength coach and fitness channel calls a must-have: creatine. Your strength goes up, your muscles look fuller, the scale finally moves in the right direction, and then you notice more hair in the shower drain than usual. You search for creatine hair loss one time, and suddenly every recommendation is a horror story, a forum post, or a video telling you that creatine is quietly trading your hair for gains. You hear that creatine spikes some hormone with a long name, that this hormone eats your hair follicles alive, and that every scoop is pushing you closer to baldness. Is any of that actually true? Is the most researched performance supplement on the planet hiding a side effect that nobody wants to admit? Or has creatine become the perfect villain for a problem that was already written in your genes before you ever touched a weight? In this video, you are going to discover where this whole myth started, what the science really says about creatine, hormones, and hair, who might genuinely need to be more careful, and the real, unfortunate side effect of creatine that almost nobody talks about. Before you ever blame creatine for your hairline, watch this video to the end, because the truth is very different from what the internet wants you to believe. The rumor: creatine destroys your hair. The fear around creatine and hair loss usually begins with a simple story. Someone starts taking creatine. A few weeks or months later, they believe their hair looks thinner. They connect the two events, and suddenly creatine is labeled as the enemy. The rumor is almost always framed in the same neat chain of logic. Step 1. Creatine supposedly increases a hormone called dihydrotestosterone, which is a more potent form of testosterone. Step 2. Dihydrotestosterone is associated with male pattern hair loss. Step 3. Therefore, creatine must cause hair loss. On the surface, this sounds reasonable. It feels scientific. You have a supplement, a hormone, and an outcome, all wrapped up in a tidy story that fits into a short social media post. However, when you start to pull on each part of that chain, it quickly becomes clear that there is a huge difference between a scary story and solid evidence. To understand how this rumor became so powerful, you need to see the single piece of research that almost every claim is built on, and what that research actually showed. The famous rugby study that refuses to die. Almost every claim that creatine ruins your hair can be traced back to one small study on college-age rugby players that is now more than a decade old. This one paper has been repeated, misquoted, and exaggerated so many times that it feels like a giant wall of evidence. In reality, it is a single brick. In that trial, a group of male rugby players were divided into two groups. One group took creatine, the other group took a placebo. For the first week, the creatine group used a loading phase, 25 grams of creatine per day for 7 days. For the following 2 weeks, they continued with 5 grams of creatine per day. The entire study lasted 21 days. Throughout this period, the researchers drew blood and measured several hormones, including testosterone and dihydrotestosterone. They wanted to see whether creatine supplementation would change these hormone levels in any meaningful way. At the end of the study, the group that took creatine showed an increase in dihydrotestosterone compared to their own starting value. When the researchers calculated the percentage change, they reported that dihydrotestosterone had risen by about 40% from baseline in the creatine group. This percentage became the perfect headline for fear. Creatine increases dihydrotestosterone by 40%. Creatine may speed up hair loss. Those phrases began to spread. Websites copied each other. Videos cited each other. Over time, that single statistic morphed into an unchallenged belief that creatine causes baldness. However, almost nobody talks about the other details in that study, and those details completely change how you should interpret it. What the study actually showed when you look closely. If you move beyond the dramatic percentage and look closely at the rugby study, the story becomes far less alarming. The first thing that stands out is that, before any creatine was given, the athletes in the placebo group actually had higher levels of dihydrotestosterone than the athletes in the creatine group. In other words, at the starting line, with no creatine in the picture, some of these young men already had more dihydrotestosterone in their blood than the creatine group would have even after supplementation. The creatine group started a little lower, so when their levels rose, the percentage increase looked large, even though the final absolute values were not dramatically different from the placebo group. By the end of the 21 days, the creatine group reached a dihydrotestosterone level that was not very far away from where the placebo group had started without any creatine at all. When you look at the actual numbers rather than the isolated percentage, it becomes clear that the change is not as extreme as the headlines make it sound. The second crucial point is even more important. This study did not measure hair loss. Not once. The researchers did not count hairs, they did not photograph hairlines, and they did not track any changes to scalp or hair thickness over time. The only thing this study showed is that, in a small group of male athletes, taking creatine for 3 weeks changed the reading of one hormone on a blood test. There was no evidence in that paper that any of the athletes lost hair as a result. There was no evidence that this short-term hormonal shift translated into any visible change on their head. The leap from "this hormone changed slightly in the blood" to "creatine makes you go bald" was created by people on the internet, not by the scientists who ran the trial. Once you understand that, the next question becomes obvious. What role does dihydrotestosterone actually play in hair loss? And is creatine likely to be a meaningful player in that process? Dihydrotestosterone, genetics, and why some hairlines suffer. Dihydrotestosterone has become a kind of villain in discussions about male pattern baldness, but the real story is more complicated. The most common type of hair loss in men is called androgenic alopecia. The key word here is androgenic, which means that it is influenced by male sex hormones, and alopecia, which refers to hair loss. This condition is overwhelmingly driven by genetics. If you have androgenic alopecia, certain hair follicles on your scalp are unusually sensitive to the presence of dihydrotestosterone. Over time, under the influence of this hormone, those follicles begin to shrink. Each new hair that grows out becomes thinner and shorter, until eventually the follicle may stop producing visible hair altogether. That is how a full, dense hairline slowly becomes a receding or thinning one. However, the critical point is this. It is not just about how much dihydrotestosterone is circulating in your blood. It is about how your individual follicles respond to it. Two men can have similar hormone levels, but if one of them has genes that make his follicles very sensitive to dihydrotestosterone, he may lose hair much earlier and much more noticeably than the other man, who keeps a thick head of hair into old age. On top of that, many everyday factors shift hormone levels to some degree. Intense resistance training can influence hormones. Sprint workouts can influence hormones. Body fat levels, sleep patterns, stress, and nutrition all play roles in the hormonal environment inside your body. If every small or temporary change in dihydrotestosterone automatically caused hair loss, the vast majority of athletes and gym goers would be bald. Clearly, that is not the case. So, while dihydrotestosterone is involved in male pattern hair loss for those who are genetically predisposed, it is only one piece of a complex puzzle. This makes it very difficult to pin the blame on a single supplement without strong, direct evidence. What modern research actually says about creatine and hormones? The rugby study raised an interesting question. Could creatine meaningfully alter hormones that are connected to hair loss? The only honest way to answer that is to look at the larger body of research that has been conducted since then, not just one small trial. Over the years, scientists have examined creatine in many different groups: athletes, recreational lifters, older adults, and even clinical populations. They have measured strength, power, muscle size, performance, and in many cases, hormone levels. Creatine is one of the most studied supplements in sports nutrition. Across these studies, when testosterone and related hormones are measured, the results are usually neutral or very modest. Most well-controlled trials have not found a consistent, meaningful increase in testosterone with standard creatine use. When dihydrotestosterone is measured, the findings are inconsistent and generally small in magnitude, and they do not translate into clear evidence of hair loss. Importantly, as of now, there is not a single high-quality human study that was specifically designed to test whether creatine users lose more hair over months or years compared to people who do not use creatine. That kind of long-term, head-to-head comparison simply does not exist in the scientific literature. We do, however, have decades of data showing that creatine is safe for healthy individuals when used at normal doses, that it improves strength and performance, and that it may even have benefits for brain health and aging. Against that backdrop, the hair loss claim rests almost entirely on one small hormone study and a very large collection of anecdotes. That does not mean creatine is literally incapable of influencing hair in any human being. It does mean that, based on current evidence, there is no strong, direct link proving that creatine causes hair loss in the real world. Who should actually be cautious? With all of this in mind, the real question becomes, should you personally be worried about creatine in your hair? If you do not have a strong family history of male pattern baldness, and your hair has been stable over time, there is currently no compelling evidence that a standard creatine routine is going to suddenly trigger aggressive hair loss. For the vast majority of healthy individuals, creatine appears to be a safe and effective way to increase strength and performance. If you do have a clear genetic predisposition to hair loss, for example, if most of the men in your family experienced early balding, it is true that androgens such as dihydrotestosterone play a role in how fast that process unfolds. But it is equally true that your normal hormone levels, your age, your stress, your nutrition, and your training all contribute to the environment that your follicles experience every day. Right now, there is no strong evidence that creatine adds a significant extra push to that process. If you are in that genetically predisposed group and you feel extremely concerned, you can still make rational, measured choices instead of reacting out of fear. You can use a conservative dosing strategy with 3 to 5 grams of creatine monohydrate per day, skip aggressive loading phases, and give your body several months while you objectively observe your hair rather than making judgments on a single bad hair day. If you notice concerning changes, you should not rely on supplement myths or comment sections for guidance. A consultation with a dermatologist or hair specialist can help you understand which proven medical treatments exist for hair loss and whether you are truly experiencing an abnormal pattern. Abandoning creatine entirely based on rumors means giving up one of the most effective, well-researched performance tools available without clear evidence that it is to blame. So, what is the unfortunate side effect of creatine? Here is the twist that almost nobody talks about. With everything we know at this point, the most unfortunate side effect of creatine is probably not what it does to your hair. It is what it does to the way people think about their progress. Creatine is so effective, so inexpensive, and so widely used that it has become a convenient scapegoat for problems it most likely did not cause. A receding hairline that was coded into your genes from birth begins to appear in your 20s? Blame creatine. Fluctuations in hormones from hard training, stress, and lack of sleep? Blame creatine. Normal hair shedding cycles, where you lose and replace around 100 hairs per day? Blame creatine. The real unfortunate side effect is that fear clouds judgment. Many lifters and athletes either never start creatine or stop using it just as it begins to work, not because of what the science shows, but because of a story that feels scarier than the truth. They throw away a supplement with a massive track record for increasing strength, power, and muscle, all because one small study was blown out of proportion and repeated for years. In other words, the main casualty is not your scalp. It is your potential progress. The myth does not just attack creatine. It silently holds back the training results that you could have enjoyed if you had relied on data instead of fear. What you should actually do from here. Now that you know where the myth came from and what the research really says, you can approach creatine with a clear head instead of anxiety. If you decide to use it, keep it simple. Choose basic creatine monohydrate from a reputable brand. Take 3 to 5 grams per day, consistently, with or without a loading phase, depending on your patience. Drink enough water throughout the day, since creatine helps your muscles draw in and store more fluid. Give it several weeks and pay attention to the things that creatine is actually proven to influence. Your strength in the gym, your ability to perform repeated high-intensity efforts, your muscle size, and your overall training quality. If you are genuinely concerned about your hair, evaluate it over months using photos taken in consistent lighting and angles, rather than reacting to a single alarmed glance in the mirror. If you notice real changes that worry you, speak with a qualified medical professional rather than asking a supplement company or a stranger on the internet. Finally, if you know someone who refuses to take creatine because they are convinced it will destroy their hair, share this video with them. Let them see how weak the evidence really is and how much power a myth can have if it goes unchallenged. If you found this breakdown helpful, tell me in the comments what your experience has been with creatine and your hair, and which other supplement myths you want to see dissected with actual science. Make sure you subscribe so that you do not miss future videos.